This conference will now be recorded.
Well, and I have 8:30, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. Jeff ended up working, so I'm filling in. Let's see. So first item on the agenda, we don't normally ask about, or I guess I'm sorry, we have public hearing. The first public hearing is an ordinance amending Cottage Grove Municipal Code Title 14 Development Code to adopt Chapter 14.35 Surface Water Management, which includes erosion prevention provisions. Amanda.
Greetings, good morning. So this public hearing is for the ordinance that we discussed a few weeks ago. Well, it feels like forever ago, when we brought forward some ideas for how we were going to deal with modifications to this. And so this is the amended ordinance after that followed our discussion to try to make sure that, if you remember, we didn't capture gardens and the unintended consequences of development, and that is not associated with active construction permits. So the ordinance that is presented for the public hearing in this case is for erosion prevention regulations under the surface water management section of the development code, and it targets construction activities.
Okay. Any questions, comments on this item? Okay, not hearing none, we'll move on to the next public hearing, which is a hearing declaring surplus of real property map and tax lot 20-03-27-32 tax lot 1800. Fee.
Thank you. So this item, at the last council meeting, we brought an item where the council dedicated a portion of this, actually about 2/3 of this property, to road right-of-way, which is the existing Gateway Road. This is the remainder portion, about a little over 7,000 square feet. And this hearing is to take comments in regarding the potentially declaring it surplus property.
Okay. Any questions or comments on this item? Okay, seeing and hearing none. Move on. Let's see. So consent agenda. Did everybody get a chance to look at the minutes? Any changes? Seeing none. Let me move forward to the next item here. Okay, resolutions and ordinances. Item A, the second vote on the ordinance amending, and I guess this is the one from the public hearing, correct, Amanda?
This one is from last week's, or 2 weeks ago, the January 25th council meeting. This is the second vote on the on the public hearing that we had January 25th.
Oh, the previous one. Okay,
right.
Awesome. Any questions from the council? Yes.
Councilor Fleck, I just wanted to call to your attention on the consent calendar. There is an item there regarding two easements that are two right-of-way easements that are being given by Dave and Carol Rogers as part of their public benefit for their triplex that they built. So I just wanted to make sure everybody is aware that there was more than just minutes on there.
Right. Okay. Yes, Richard.
And it's important that we're doing the second vote on that ordinance because we made those changes to it at the last council meeting. So rather than it being able to be adopted in one meeting, we moved it to a 2-vote process because there were some significant changes. We didn't think they were significant, but they were different from what was originally published. Yeah.
Right. We replaced the term that had been detached cottage and just replaced it with detached in section 6, and we replaced section 9, which was the parking section, with the alternative section 9 that staff presented at the January 25th work session.
Okay. Anything from the council on these items? Okay, that'll move us on to item B, which was from the public hearing. I assume everybody is clear on that. From the public hearing Monday, this coming Monday.
Correct. This is the first vote on the public hearing that we'll start the meeting with on the erosion control ordinance.
Okay. So item C is a resolution establishing appropriations within the 2021 budget for expenditure of unforeseen specific purpose grant proceeds from the Coronavirus Relief Fund. Richard.
So we received we didn't receive $328,944.98. It was allocated to us as a reimbursement grant from the federal government through the state. If you remember correctly, through the Coronavirus Relief Fund established through the CARES Act, money was given to the states to then, if they needed, they could pass it on to the local governments. It did require some efforts on the part of the league and cities to get the state to say yes, that they were going to share that. They originally were not going to share any of that money, and it was going to be the state was going to be using it all. We did get the state to share, and our allocation was $328,944.98, and it was reimbursement. So we had to spend the money on things that were eligible under the U.S. Treasury guidance that was put out with the CARES Act. And it's very specific in its categories, and you can see the categories there in the table on the memo. And this grant fund is money that we spent in order to get reimbursed, and we turned in our last reimbursement for everything spent up through December 30th. We did a couple meetings ago extend our agreement with the CARES Act because with the appropriations bill that was just passed before the end of the year at Congress, they included in that appropriations bill an extension of the CARES Act deadline to December 31st of 2021. The state through DAS has extended that to June 30th instead of December, but we've spent all our money because we were planning to spend it all before the 30th of December. They passed that appropriation bill late in December, which it doesn't do you any good. You had to have it spent before the end of December, and so we were already on track to do that. We have spent probably about $120,000 more than what we were reimbursed for, and so hopefully, because we extended the agreement with DAS, if the federal government comes out with additional CARES Act money or additional appropriations that would follow the same Treasury Department guidelines, we could get that money and get reimbursed for that. So we'll see. But this $328,000 is over the course of 2 fiscal years. So you'll notice that the totals in the resolution that's been prepared for appropriation is less than the 328 because we spent about 60,000 of it in last year's budget. We didn't appropriate that because we absorbed it into the budget. This year, the remaining $268,000 we spent out of general reserve or other places in the budget for a lot of major projects and things associated with the COVID tied to those guidelines from the Treasury Department. And we still have those projects that we actually budgeted for in the budget to do, but we've spent all the money. For example, a good one is your city council meeting expense. Your city council meeting expense is overspent by probably about $3,000, $4,000. And that's because the equipment that's in the council chambers, setting up the Zoom and the GoToMeetings and all of the technology that we did so that we can handle these meetings, and Planning Commission, City Council, all of the meetings that way, was expensive, and we spent that money and it wasn't budgeted. But because it's a grant, we can put that money back in. And so the resolution is taking and following state law in allowing us to take that unforeseen grant funds, because we didn't know we were getting this money until July. Even though some of it went into last year's budget, we were able to reimburse back to March. So starting in July, we started getting this money once we reimbursed for it. And so this is just putting that money back into the budget so we can use those line items for the things that we were actually going to use them for, so we can balance at the end of the year. Any questions?
Any questions from the council?
Council President?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. The care for the homeless population, $168,304.32. How much of that was the warming center?
If you subtracted out about there was 59,000 as the shower trailer. And then I think we have another $2,000 or $3,000 in supplies for the shower trailer. And so the remaining portion of that is the work that we did for the homeless shelter, pretty close. We also included in there our porta potty rentals that are at the community center and the cleaning of the restrooms and stuff like that at All America City Square, where we opened stuff up since buildings were closed when we typically had those things closed. So those are also in there too. So there's probably another 20 in that as well. So it's just under $100,000 that we use to prepare the site and get everything ready for the warming shelters.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, President.
You bet. You bet. Are there any other questions from the council on this resolution? Okay, so that'll move.
Greg had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Greg.
Sorry, I was late to the party there. That Councilor Roberts' question sparked another question. In terms, there was a staffing costs associated with the warming shelter, and I assume those would be ongoing through this season, which may or may not extend past whatever reimbursable time there is. So the warming shelters does that include staff, or is that included in the homeless
That's
care?
a different funding source for staff.
Yeah.
The warming shelters, the city is building and constructed the infrastructure. We put the physical stuff together. The actual operation of the warming shelters is being done by community sharing. So they have funding through Lane County that they're using that is ongoing funding that will continue to fund the staffing costs and everything. So our costs have just been for the infrastructure and the installation of sewer, water lines, all of that stuff, and the preparation of the site, the fencing, all of those things that we did, and equipment that needed to be there. And then the actual operation is paid for in a different pocket out of going through Lane County, but some of that money, most of that money is coming from the federal government as well. So yeah, Mike probably
or state government.
Yeah.
Richard?
Yeah.
Richard, this is Candace. Sorry, my camera is not working. Do you know how many people were there at the last night at the warming shelter or through?
Yes, and Councillor Fleck in his role from community sharing could also answer that too. The first night that they were open, it was 9. The second night, which was a week ago, I think, or something like that, was 7. So we've had 16 so far that have been in the shelter and used that. We've actually there was one couple that did stay in one of the larger units, so they were actually able to stay together, which they wouldn't have been able to do in beds for freezing nights. So they've had 2 activations so far with a total of 16 people. There are some repeats in those numbers, I think, from one night.
A couple. And there were a couple pets in the second activation.
That's true.
A couple what, pets?
Pets.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. I do want to mention our philosophy and theme was in spending this CARES Act money was to do things that were things. This is we treated it as a one-time chunk of money coming in, and to kind of answer a little more of Councilor Irvin's question, we didn't want to do things that were tied to a lot of staffing that would be continued. We do have some staffing expenses on there for employees substantially dedicated to COVID stuff. That was for building the sneeze guards and putting up stuff that we needed to build and put together to put those safety issues in place. The paid sick and paid family leave, those were those leaves that we've been required to do under the federal law and we're continuing to do, but that's the extent of our employee costs. The Treasury Department changed their rules in September on how you could do employee costs and expanded it a little bit to where they actually issued some guidance, and the league was promoting and telling cities that, yeah, you can put your whole police department expenditure in there. Our thought was, wait a minute, we've budgeted for our police department to be operating already, and they're continuing to do the same things, and COVID is sure making them do some little different things. But we didn't feel like we could take and put the entire operation of the police department in. That wouldn't give us anything new. I mean, we'd be essentially you're displacing money that you've already used for the same thing, and we didn't want to do that. We actually could have, and some of the money that we've got lined up, that if we get additional expenditures, CARES Act funding, we could take for public works and for police. We could say, hey, our police officers spend about an hour every shift cleaning vehicles and cleaning stuff in shift changes and after dealing with their clients and stuff like that, to clean the vehicles and clean equipment and disinfect. We could count that, and we've got that documented, but we kept that back to do physical capital stuff first that will have some value and assets for us to handle other emergencies in the future, rather than waste it on something that we'd spend and be gone and be done. So that was kind of our philosophy and thought on how to use that money, and we continued to do that, and it worked pretty good for us.
Good. Councilor Roberts.
Thank you, Council President. Well, the reason I brought up the 168,000, Richard, because there was been some public questions about the possibility of having that itemized, but some people still think that we double paid for the shelters, which I've been telling them we haven't.
No.
So I was wondering if maybe by Monday we could have more of a breakdown on that, just to show the public what we're actually doing with the homeless money, the homeless part of this money. Is that possible?
we can break that out a little bit more into those specific projects. I mean, we could break it out and show you, here's how much we spent on electricity, here's how much we spent
I think that would
putting
be
the electrical
great.
stuff in, and the generator and things like that. But we'll break it out by project more. But yeah, we can do that. The other important thing to note, and this is one of those issues that people have complained about, and is that, yeah, this is money could have been spent on roads, or it could have been spent on something else. No, it cannot. And plain and simple, it cannot be spent on anything but these things. And predominantly, one of the number one priorities for this CARES Act money was to do things for the homeless population. That's what they were really, really pushing for, and we did it. I mean, we followed that and enacted and did that kind of stuff for it. But yeah, we can break that out and show how it's less than 100 for the warming shelter location, but there are lots of other things that happened as a result of trying to take care of the unsheltered during this crisis as well.
Yeah, I just would like to nip the ugly rumors, but and make sure. Yeah, I mean, I know that, we all know that, but I think it's important that we educate the public on that too. Thank you very much, Richard.
Richard, this is Candace again. I'm sorry. I have one more question. Do we know if the 16 people that we accommodated are local to Cottage Grove?
I'll let Councillor Fleck answer that, because he has more of that detailed information. He can't share very detailed information on that because it's confidential, but I think he can share kind of the locale of it. And
yeah, I've not seen an actual report. My understanding is there were a couple people from the Eugene area at the first activation. I'm not certain on the second, but I think there were a couple as well. But the concern was because Egan didn't run on either of those activations, that folks would rush down here. And I think that we've established that that is not the case. I think that we just had folks that happened to be here and utilize the shelter, which I think is absolutely fine, and I'm not concerned about it at all. So I think overall it's actually been very good. I certainly recognize most of the folks that were there. So I do think it's absolutely been a huge benefit to our unhoused folks here in Cottage Grove.
So Councillor Fleck, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Candace.
So it was my understanding at the beginning of this that we were not going to open unless Eugene did. Is that been changed?
Yeah, I would say that we've had to change. I'm not certain, but my understanding is that Egan's had some real challenges around volunteers, and so they have not been activating anything like they normally would. And so I'll touch on this with Richard here in a second, but we've chosen to go ahead and keep operating unless it becomes a problem. So at this point, yes, we will continue to activate when the temperature hits the threshold. and we're working on that too. The weather has been a real challenge for us. It's changed dramatically in a short period of time where we weren't able to activate quickly enough, for the changing weather. So that's something we're also working on. But, if we do end up, at capacity, and next week is probably going to be a test for that because we're looking at a potential multiple day activation next week. We could be open as soon as Sunday, but it seems very likely by Tuesday we will be operating, and it may be for 2, 3, 4 days in a row. And then we'll see, if that becomes a problem. And Richard, I noticed you had a hand up.
Yeah, and I do want to say that, yeah, we recognize some of the people, most of the people that came the first night. And Councillor Fleck didn't mention that we're keeping the temperature, or they're keeping, because they're operating it, they're keeping the temperature the same. The setting is still below 30 degrees, which is below what Egan does. But Egan's having problems getting started and getting their volunteers up and running, probably because of COVID and the virus and finding those people. So we didn't change anything that would have been activated if Egan had been up and running. And so we're not going to stop not doing ours here just because they're not ready to do theirs yet. We do need to do it. But the other thing, the people that are signed up and show that they're from Eugene, that's kind of misleading as well, because that's where they maybe got some services. They don't have an address. They don't have a shelter or a home. So maybe they happen to go to Eugene to get some service from some agency, and that's what they're registered in on the computer system that they're using to count for the people that are coming to the shelter. So they could be local people. They just went to Eugene for some service that we don't have, and that's how they've been recognized in the system.
While I understand that, I just feel like we need to go on record with the concerns of our constituents that this is a possibility of not taking care of our own in Cottage Grove, but attracting more people here that are not necessarily locals and putting a strain on our police force, our paramedics. So I just want to put that out there, that this is a concern of constituents, and it's been brought up to me many, many times. And so I think we need to keep that in mind, representing the people of Cottage Grove.
Right.
Okay, is there anything else on this item? Okay, so let's go ahead and move on then. So the next item is a resolution declaring surplus real property. I believe this is also from the public hearing. Any other questions or comments on that one?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, yes, it's a follow-up from the declaration from the public hearing of surplus property, but it also includes an offer for that property from Double H Investment Group. So the resolution would be to declare it surplus and also authorize the sale.
Any questions, concerns, comments? Okay, that moves us to item 8, business from the City Council. Item A is discussion regarding water rights and water management and conservation. Plan, sorry. And who is this one? Faye.
That's me. Yeah, so we've invited our consultant contractor, Adam Sussman with GSI and Associates. We have used them since 2009 regarding water rights. They're a water rights specialist in trying to perfect the water rights for the Brow River Water Treatment Plant. So this will be kind of a 101 because most of the counselors probably haven't been exposed to this conversation, to talk about water rights, the importance of it, and then also talk about what's transpired since 2009 to date. We finally heard from the Water Resources Department that the extension has been approved for our water rights, and then that includes, in that extension being granted, it includes us having to adopt a water management and conservation plan, which will be touched on, and then also the tasks forward to hopefully perfect that water right so it's permanently allocated to the water treatment plant. So this will be hopefully a very good conversation, and it's a very important one for the council to hear.
Greg.
What role, if any, does the Watershed Council have in this process of perfecting the water rights, or will that be covered in the overview?
Well, I'll just touch on the role. The role is they're an interested party that gives comments on the water right requests. They'll also, we're sending them a copy of the Water Master Conservation Plan that, our management conservation plan, that they'll be welcome to make comments on. So they're an interested party that is given the information, and then they're have the ability to make comments to the Water Resources Department and ourselves on our plans.
Councilor Irvin.
Ooh, the Water Resources Department, is that a department in the city, or is it?
No, it's the state of Oregon. And so they're charged with managing all the water rights in the state of Oregon. They also manage wells on private properties, smaller wells outside the unincorporated areas. So they manage all the water rights in the state of Oregon.
Thank you.
I'm going to put myself in the queue here. So are we going to talk about the transferring of rights? And, you know, because this was actually something I brought up years ago when we were talking about bringing, you know, the Lane, you know, water treatment plant down here to the Rao plant, and actually concerns I raised about, you know, transferring those water rights. And we actually had an attorney at that time say, oh, no, you've got the oldest certified rights in the area. You shouldn't have any problems. And of course, you know, Water Watch challenged, you know, that, you know, previous attempt, and we're having, you know, some challenges. So I'm hoping we're going to get kind of the full discussion around, you know, what's transpired.
Yes, Councilor, that's exactly what is intended, is to go through that complete history, talk about the challenge, talk about, you know, what was trying to be achieved, where we're at, the plan forward, how much water rights that we'd like to transfer, we have transferred down here to the Rao River plant, and how we're trying to perfect the water rights that are specific to this site property, the water rights that the golf course had when the city purchased the golf course. So it's intended to be pretty comprehensive in that area, Councilor.
Okay, thank you. So are there any other questions or comments on this item? Okay, so that'll move us on. So the next thing will be, next item is item B, the Vision Keepers Committee appointments. And that is Teresa, which is not here. Richard.
So we have the Vision Keeper appointments that you need to make. We have some, they interviewed the positions for the at-large and made those recommendations to appoint after the interviews, where's the name here? I'm trying to find his name. Dan Hamburg and Cynthia Fisher to the at-large positions.
I believe Riley Newman as well.
And Riley Newman as well. And I think they were appointing, I'm trying to find where it says which ones. Yeah, here we go. Riley Newman and Dan were going to be the full term, and then they'd appoint Cynthia Fisher to the at-large that was vacated by Christy Inskip, so that that term would expire in December of 21. And take care of that. And then they had a number of lead partners. We still have some lead partners that have not submitted their nominations for representatives yet, but as we get those, we'll bring those to the council for their approval. But we have Crystal Morrison from Family Relief Nursing, Jim Gilroy from Downtown Cottage Grove, Beth Poole from Sustainable Cottage Grove, and Shauna Nye from the Chamber of Commerce.
Okay. Any questions, comments from the council? Not, that'll move us to item C, which is the audit committee meeting and audit acceptance. Bert.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So the city's audit committee met on Tuesday, February 2nd. Everyone was there with the exception of Karen Winters, who wasn't able to attend. The audit committee was presented with the CAFR, the annual financial report for the city. And you can find that on the web if you haven't been able to see it yet. Our auditor, Mr. Hawkins, was there, and virtually, of course, and he discussed the roles of the auditors and then the roles of management. They did give us a clean, unqualified opinion for our financial statement. He commented about the pandemic expenditures just beginning in our fourth quarter of last year, and obviously expected to see the grant funding in this fiscal year. So he'll see substantial changes from that in this current year budget, which you're doing with this resolution. He also went over the substantial changes from one year to the next with the audit committee. One thing that they did bring up that this management staff isn't willing really to change at this point was he wanted us to consider recording our debt service expenditures within the enterprise funds. Currently, we have a debt service fund that all debt is transferred into and paid for. And what that does for you as the city council and the public is puts all of our debt requirements in one location so you can see everything. We had closed that fund a couple years ago, and it was very hard to track what we were paying for, what the loans totally were. So we went back to this fund being developed, and it's within state budget requirements, and I think we want to continue to do that. And so that was one of the considerations, though, that he had for us. What else did he have? Let's see. Brought up implementing additional policies related to passwords used to access the city's systems, which was already in the works for us and has been completed, as well as segregating duties related to the transportation of cash. And what he means is taking the deposit to the bank. And we have addressed those too. But they weren't substantial problems. They were just something for us to consider. So it's the recommendation of the audit committee that the city's financial statements and supplemental information be accepted and put on permanent file by the city council.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this item? Oh, Richard.
I just wanted to clarify too on the debt service one. You know, when we moved that back and put it in the enterprise zones of several years ago, we did that because the auditor said you need to do that. And then we found out that that was only because it made it easier for them. The laws and the general accounting principles do not say that you need to do it that way. And so we switched back. In our previous audit, they said, yeah, that's okay. You can do that. It's there's nothing wrong with it. It makes it so much easier for us, for staff, for the public, for everyone to be able to see where the debt money goes, how it's paid, and stuff, rather than essentially, as I see it, it's hidden in the enterprise funds or in the individual funds, and so it's hard to add that all up and figure it out. I think the way we're doing it is better for transparency. I hate that word, but it's better for us to be able to see and for the public to be able to see that, yeah, when we borrow $50,000 for a backhoe, yeah, there's 15 here, 15 here, 15 here, and it totals it up and we can see what it is in the debt service. And I think it's just the better way to go. The only reason they keep requesting that is it makes it easier for the auditor. It really does make it easier for the auditor to do their audit part if it's all taken out of the individual funds in the way that they want it.
I would comment, though, that we do provide them with what's called a lead sheet that identifies every fund associated with the payment for the specific debt. So they do get the information from us. It's just not recorded within the fund like they'd like to see it. So when they do their GAAP reporting, they have to draw from the reserve fund, say the water fund, whoever we have that debt associated with the enterprise fund, and collapse it together.
So I'm going to jump in the queue here. So doesn't the only downside of this is doesn't this make our budget look significantly larger because we're actually counting for this twice in that overall, what is it, 44 million right now? So isn't like about 4 million of that a duplicate, you know, because of this process?
Yeah, and that, and as well as, you know, any of the transfers and stuff do that too. But yeah, you do count that at an additional time because it's a different fund, right?
Right.
And that's, we just have to be aware that that happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm totally, I agree. I think having it easier for folks to understand is better. I just wanted to kind of point that out as the only thing that could be a negative. Any other comments or concerns? Okay, thank you, Bert. Let's move on to item D, intergovernmental agreement between the cities of Cottage Grove and Crestwell regarding floodplain development program services, and this will be Faye.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it's hard to believe we're very close to 3 years of providing building services to the city of Crestwell and our other partners. This agreement is being brought forward in the current building services agreement that we have with Crestwell. The IGA, it accounts for staff time, planning staff time if it's needed. And in the past, about 10 hours of planning staff time has been used by Crestwell to help advise regarding their floodplain in Crestwell. Crestwell is needing and would like to be able to appoint a certified floodplain manager for their city. They don't have a staff member that's capable or is certified. We have 2 in the city of Cottage Grove, and so this agreement would be it's staff time. We don't expect any more staff time than we've traditionally had over the last 3 years for Crestwell, but it allows them to formally appoint a floodplain manager for their city. So that's the intent of this IGA.
Okay, any comments or concerns from the council? Nope. Okay, gosh, thank you, Faye. All right, item E, vacant Ward 1 city council position. Richard.
So we have a vacancy in the city council as of last night at midnight in the Ward 1 position, and the council, this item is for the council to be able to discuss how they want to fill that position. In the past, the city has advertised vacancies and requested applications, then interviewed and reviewed those applications and interviewed the candidates if they had more than just one to fill the vacancy, and appointed that way. They've also in the past just appointed somebody who ran at the last election for the position in that area. So there's a variable way that the council can do it. This is a time for you to decide how to do it. The key pieces is that it needs to be somebody from Ward 1, and they have to reside in Ward 1 and continue to reside in Ward 1 throughout the remaining portion of the term. This would be for the term that would last until December 31st, 2022, so they don't have to be up for election partway through the term, because it is only the last 2 years of the term, so their next election would be in November of 22.
Okay, so how would we like to go forward? Comments from the council?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I would like to do interviews. I've had 3 citizens from Ward 1 ask me about the possibility of taking that seat. So I think we should do it like the way I was appointed. I think we should open it up and take interviews. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in discussing what method to do and everything Monday night, you may also want to think about timelines, how you want to break that out. You know, if we do a recruitment process, and this kind of ties into the next agenda item with goal setting, but if you're going to do advertising and stuff, then there's going to be a period of time in advertising, taking applications, and then you're going to have to schedule the interviews and do that process. It may move into March in order to get that accomplished and everything. So those are things to think about as you make that discussion Monday night.
Any other comments? I guess I'll chime in. I actually agree with Councilor Roberts. I would certainly want to take applications and interviews. Just as a heads up, interviews for the public, this will all be in public. You know, so we cannot do those in executive or anything like that. It has to be in public. But I do agree with Councilor Roberts on this one.
And I think the goal setting can be if it has to be put off another week or two for this process to be run out for the betterment of Cottage Grove, I agree.
Absolutely. Okay, anything else there?
I think Councillor Stennett had his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks. Is it to our detriment to not be a full council for the time that it would take to do the interviews? If it isn't, then I don't see why we would change that and not give a lot of people, whoever wants the opportunity.
The Councillor Stennett and President Fleck, it's a detriment in a way that, I mean, Monday night you've got a great presentation that is planned on water rights that is going to be fundamental for people to understand. You're going to miss things like that in some of the discussions. The next council meeting is going to be a humdinger of a council meeting with 2 presentations that are very important presentations. But it doesn't jeopardize the ability of the city council to perform because you have more than a quorum. But there's really no way to, if people are interested, if somebody is interested in being on the council and you know who they are, I would strongly suggest that if they're interested in being an applicant and go through this process, that they come to these meetings so that they can see this information that's being presented in the next couple of meetings. So I don't think it's a detriment terribly bad, but it's just one of those that, they're going to be coming on partway through the show, but that happens regardless. I mean, you get elected and you're coming in partway through a show, and so those are the only things. It's not going to jeopardize any kind of conduct of business. You can continue to perform. Yeah.
John, did you have something else?
Can we announce the opening right away then and make that suggestion sort of semi-officially? Like if you're interested, there's a lot going on.
If officially we can't announce it until you guys decide which direction you want to go. But if you know of people who are interested, and you individually or as individual council members can definitely encourage them and say, hey, this is really important, and it will fare very well in the interview process if you've come to these meetings as well. I mean, you can tell them that hey, this is something I'm going to take into account in the interview process. Are you really interested? And as soon as you knew, did you start coming to council meetings to catch the information? That's what we can do. We can't officially announce it as being because we don't know what you're going to do until you make the decision Monday night. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And also, I do agree with interviews. And also, I would really hope that anyone that comes on as an applicant for city council would be involved in our community anyway, and hopefully is already coming to our meetings.
Good points, good points. Anything else on this item from the council? Okay, so that'll move us to business. It is still from the city council. Item F, goal setting work session date. And as it sounds, we're going to want to probably put that off. Richard.
Yeah, we have a counselor who has realized that they are not going to be able to come on the 27th of March. And this is one of those things that it would really be nice to have the entire council there in the work session. We could move it earlier to the 20th, but then you get into the situation of the vacant position and trying to get that filled by the 20th. We could move it to the 3rd of April. Not the best alternative, but it does get everybody involved. It is Easter weekend on the 3rd of April, and so that'll be something to talk about Monday night, is what works for your calendars. Be prepared to come and explain which dates are best for you. And we could even move a little bit further in April, but you go back further in April, then we're starting to get close to being with budget committee meetings. I think the budget committee meetings actually start in May or early May. So we definitely want to have the position filled, and it'd really be nice to have the goals kind of set aside and done before those May meetings as well.
Councilor Urban.
Thank you. In terms of getting someone appointed and going through interviews, what is that how quickly can that be done? Are we just going based on whenever we can schedule people, and so we're kind of predicting that it's going to be into late March, or can we have an accelerated timeline for that and keep this? Well, I guess somebody can't make it, but make it earlier.
I mean, we've got to consider how we're going to get the word out. I mean, getting the word out on the webpage and passing the word around is great, but you're probably going to definitely want to put it in the paper, which means that if you make the decision to do and go that route, we might be able to squeeze getting it in the newspaper on the 10th, 11th, on their publication that comes out on the 11th of February. So that would be the Thursday after Mondays. Monday night is usually the deadline, or Friday's the deadline for ads. We can kind of ask nicely, and they usually do really well at accommodating us to try to get something in. We've almost got it written. So the matter of getting it put in the paper would be relatively fast, that we could say, hey, save us a spot on Tuesday morning, first thing, we'll get it to you. That might work. So you've got that time. So when it publishes on the 11th, you're probably going to want to give a week at least for people to respond to that publication. So that would get you the applications by the 18th or 19th of February. Kind of looking at the calendar, then your next meeting is the 22nd. If you wanted to schedule a time for interviews prior to that meeting, you could do interviews from 5:30 to 7, or depending on how many we have. I mean, if you have 2, you could do them at 6 to 7 before a council meeting. If you have 5, it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge to try to find a time to do that. So there's a lot of flex there. Then you could do the interviews. If you did them on the 22nd, you could actually appoint somebody on the 22nd. That would really be expedited. I mean, that would really be pushing it, and I think it might be a challenge to try to do. But definitely you could probably, with a little bit more time in there for recruitment and a little better time for interviews, you can maybe do them on a different day of the week as well, in that last week in February or that very first week in March, and have something for that first meeting in March on the 8th. So that's probably the date that I would probably shoot for, that you'd be able to do it. But I mean, there's so many variables. If we had 5 or 6 people apply, that's going to make it a little longer process to try to do.
Councilor Urban.
Once somebody is appointed, and how long do you give for them to get their whole orientation process? Because it seems like that might be a good thing to have under the belt before going into a goal setting as well. Could that be accomplished the week of the 8th, or the last week or the first week in March?
As soon as we get that person appointed, yeah, we'd try to get something scheduled to get them an orientation, and we'd probably try to do anybody else on the council who wants to come. It's been a challenge to try to do those under COVID stuff, but yeah, we definitely want to do that and try to get that in as well before the goal setting. You're right.
Anything else? I think that sounds like the way to go, is to shoot for the 8th, which would allow us to extend, the application period, which would be better for advertising and, making sure everybody in the community knows this opportunity exists. I think it still allows us the opportunity to do the 20th, if we're hoping to stay earlier. Although I'll be honest, I'm not concerned about pushing into April, because I think that's actually a great conversation to have before the budget process, although it leaves staff less time to adjust to those comments. But yeah, so I mean, if we can make it happen, I think that would be ideal. But anyway, any other comments? Okay, so that moves us to concerns of the council. Do we have any concerns? Oh, Councilor Robert.
I got a couple concerns that have come across my way. I guess Cresswell opened up their basketball courts People have been asking me, is there any chance of our new courts at Coiner Park getting a chance to open up?
That is interesting, and I was going to bring that up in my report as well. Cresswell's wrong. You cannot open your basketball courts up for playing basketball. They need to look at not the chart that was put out by the governor, but the specific guidelines, because at the bottom of the chart, it says additional notes, refer to the sector-specific guidelines. In the sector-specific guidelines, it defines playing basketball as a contact sport, as a full contact sport, because you're within the 6-foot proximity during a basketball game. I mean, you have to be. That's how you play basketball. And as such, in the middle of page 2 on the sector guidance, it says full contact sports are prohibited. So they cannot do that. We took that to our attorney because we were thinking, okay, this is ridiculous. We'd like to open those. You know, we've done all that work and got a great court and everything. Can we put a sign up that says, hey, you're playing at your own risk? Our attorney has given us advice that says, no, you cannot open your basketball courts. If you open them, even if you put a sign up, you are encouraging the playing of basketball. We have basketball courts that are open right now. They're not fenced. Over at Harrison Park, there's a set of basketball hoops in a court. It's not fenced. There's no way to really close it. And it's never, you know, it's never really been closed. We'd have to go in and fence it all or take them down. The only reason we took the hoops down on Coiner Park was because we did all the new work in there. And we took the hoops to be painted and powder coated so they look nice to match the court. And because of COVID, we just didn't put them back up yet. And our attorney's advice is do not put them up because that court is going to be much nicer than the court in Harrison, and it will do nothing but encourage the playing of basketball. If they're playing horse or they're just shooting hoops and staying the distance, it's fine. But if you read the guidelines, it says you're supposed to ensure, the public agency is supposed to ensure that the guidelines are followed. So we're not going to station somebody there 24 hours a day at that court, making sure people don't play basketball and only shoot hoops. And so under our counsel from our city attorney, we're not putting those back up. I would strongly suggest that Cresswell read the guidelines and the rules that are established from OHA. They're putting themselves in some liability probably.
Well, thank you for that detailed answer, Richard. Very well done. The other concern I had was the moose lodge on Highway 99. I've gotten a lot of phone calls about the pile of rubble out in front, the nuisance that it looks like, and is that a violation of code for them? I understand they're going through a process because of COVID, that they pretty much have stopped the work over there. But you know, there's been some complaints about the rubble out in front of the building. I wonder how we deal with that.
Hey,
So sure, yes. So these folks got a little aggressive and started tearing some stuff down on the property before they filed for a permit. We asked them to stop. They have filed for a permit and are actively working with our staff to get the criteria met so we can issue a permit. They have also applied for and received a demolition permit for a portion of that building, and will most likely be moving forward with the demolition of that structure in hopes of also cleaning up the rubble that's on site. So that project is in process. It took them a little while to, I think, get professionals on board because of COVID and the activity, that's the building activity that seems to be quite a bit lately. So we hope to see that that site cleaned up here soon.
Thank you, Fay.
Is that it?
Councilor Fleck?
Yeah, yes.
I did go by it yesterday, and there has been some work done there, and some of the rubble's been moved, and they've done some additional demolition work, and so it is in process. They are moving forward.
Yeah, that's great.
Any other concerns of council? Okay, that moves us on to business from the city manager. Sounds like we're going to have an update from Travel Lane County. That seems pretty self-explanatory. If I were a mayor contest.
Yeah, if you remember at the last meeting, our youth rep mentioned the If I Were Mayor contest and asked the council to consider doing that. So we've put it on the agenda for them to speak more to that. They'd like the opportunity to participate. There's a couple of YAC members that are interested in submitting an application in. So it's before the council to decide whether you want to do it. In the past, we've had some challenging applications or things that came in that just quite didn't meet the program in the sense of it. I think by having it limited or specifically through the YAC, that you will get better applications or better essays or video presentations than just publicly out. The other thing to consider is what we would want to do if we did do a local contest, what you'd want to do as that local contest. Do you want to have a local prize? In the past, there's been prize money associated with the first or second place in each of the categories. If you do tie it to the YAC, then you wouldn't need to worry about the third category with the posters, because YAC is only middle school and high school age, which are only the essay and digital media presentation.
Gotcha. Any questions on that? Oh, yes.
I'm raising my hand, Mike. You just can't see me. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Personally, I understand why you'd want to put it directly through YAC, but I know that there are a lot of kids that probably don't even know about YAC, and this might be a good opportunity to push them towards YAC. And so in that respect, I would love to see it open to all the children, but that's just my 2 cents on that.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, Richard.
And I question whether we could strictly restrict it to just YAC. I mean, we could encourage it to be the YAC, but I don't know if we can really restrict it to just YAC. So that's my thought too. Yeah.
Great comments. Anything else? Okay, let's see. That moves us to discussion regarding providing utility service outside city limits within the urban growth boundary. Faye.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fleck. So there are several locations in our city where we have little pockets of unincorporated properties that have homes on them. And in many cases, some of them are currently served with a water service or a sewer service. They may have their own well or their own septic system. We occasionally get requests from folks where they've had a well fail or their septic system fail, and they have the ability to annex into the city because they're contingent or
contiguous
adjacent to the city limits. And so state law would allow them to apply for annexation, and we go through that process. There are instances where the folks cannot annex into the city limits. They're within the UGB, but they're not adjacent to the city limits. So therefore, there's no provision for them to be able to, under state law, to be able to annex into the city. So under state law, according to our legal counsel, there is a vehicle folks could receive city services or a city service, maybe not all the city services, and not be annexed into the city through an extralateral extension of our service. And there has been recently a request. There is a property where a water main goes right in front of this property, and there are in this area properties that are served on each side of the property with water service. These services were established, I'm sure, well before state law made it not legal to hook up. So the question will be before the council is under some strict guidelines. Staff firmly believes that if we were to hook somebody up and they're not able to annex, that we have a annexation agreement with this property that once it's legal to annex, that the city could request them to annex their property in to the city limits, that would be a formal agreement that would ensure that that property, once it's legal, could be annexed. The real problem right now is a lot of these homes have no reason, once they're hooked up, if they don't have an agreement, like most of them don't, that are receiving city services, they don't have any real impotence to come into the city limits and help contribute to the general fund and the operation of the city. So staff would encourage this discussion, and if there's support for it, we'd like to put some pretty strict guidelines around it with an agreement, so that we ensure that at a future date these properties do come into the city limits when it's legal.
Councilor Irvin.
Thank you. Does this agreement essentially get filed with, so it shows up on title reports and in the public record? So if people are looking at purchasing properties, or if the ownership changes, that's something that is really immediately apparent that there's.
Yes, it'll be filed at Deeds and Records, and it'll be an item that's attached to the property, so that when folks, it's just like an easement and other items that folks get called up when they purchase their property that's attached to it.
And a follow up to that, the alternative is essentially just annexing, is expanding the city limits into the urban growth boundary. Is that correct? I mean, then that process has to be done through a much more complicated procedural route. And
well, the other alternative would be that the city would force an annexation of an area, so that the property would be brought into a city limit. That has not been a policy, and it's not really unless it's a major life safety health issue that addresses some very serious concerns like groundwater contamination or something that falls into it. I wouldn't advise that we would do any type of a forced annexation. And see, these properties can't come in until you kind of like a domino effect. Somebody brings their property in, the city limit gets closer and closer, and then finally it's adjacent to the city limits, and they legally under state law could be annexed. There have been some vehicles in the past that other cities have used, like bringing in a road, and sometimes they refer to them as cherry stem annexations, and those I'm not sure if are still legal under state law, because there's been a lot of concern with that type of activity too by cities.
Yeah, to expand on that, there's actually a restriction in the state law that says the annexation can't be so many times longer than it is wide, or something like that, so that it eliminates those narrow road annexations for a long length of time. But in the case of this one property, I think there'd be 3 or 4 properties that would have to be annexed in order for them to become contiguous. And we don't want to be in the role of telling those other 4, okay, you have to annex because your neighbor wants city water. Right now, city policy is, and in the code, it specifically says we will not hook anybody up unless they're in the city. And so basically it's an item for discussion. What's the council want to do? Do you want to change that policy that, if they've got water service on either side or on one side, and do we want to do those if they're in the urban growth boundary? We cannot do them under state law outside the urban growth boundary. That's already clearly stated in state law, unless they meet certain criteria, and it's for a planned unit development or industrial stuff that you can do some of that, but right now we can't.
And I guess one other item I would add is, and because we've had over the years these pockets and services have been allocated or have been these folks have been hooked to city services, our code does have provisions that charge. We have fees that reflect folks that are outside the city limits, and they pay a higher rate, water rate, to help compensate for the operation of the plant and also the debt service that the city has taken on, so that they're helping contribute to the operation and the maintenance and upgrade of the utility they hook to.
Anything else? So I'm going to go ahead and jump in on this. I will say that I actually was against this as I first started reading it until I got to the section about the, the requirements where consent to annex, utility extension payments, adjacent to utility service, non-remonstrance agreement, consent to lien. The other piece that I would say is that this needs to only be in that situation where they're not, contiguous. I think we need to be very clear that this is specifically, for folks who are having challenges with water or wastewater, their well or their septic's failing. They need to come into the city because I do believe that, as taxpayers, we're certainly paying a significant burden to the city's operations. And I do think that we need to be responsible in allowing folks that are not paying those taxes to join. And absolutely, if the case arises where they then can annex, they need to. They also need the non-remonstrance so that if we need to put streets in and whatnot, that will happen. So I would support this only with those very tight provisions.
I agree with you.
Any other comments on this item? Okay, that moves us to a report from the city manager.
I just have two things to kind of report on since the basketball hoops have already been talked about. We've also seen some discussion in the public regarding the last set of minutes from the last meeting, the 25th, and the discussion regarding the Safe Routes to School project. And in the minutes, it says that Ron, he said there could also be some reimbursement from property owners who requested additional work on their property. The comments have been, hey, how dare you? You're already getting grant money for this and you're charging the residents for their sidewalks. No, that's not what this says. This says for additional work. This is if the property owner came to us and said, hey, I'd like to widen my driveway. Could I use the concrete and your contract, and can they put an extra pad on the side of my driveway and be a part of the cost? That's what we're talking about here. This is additional work for the property owner on their property. It is not any of the work associated with the sidewalks or the Safe Routes to School projects. We are not charging the property owners for that work. It is for work they requested that they would have had to have gone out and got a contractor for on their own. So they are getting a benefit there where they're getting our bulk rate and the contractor's already there and doing work, they save some money. So if anybody hears that comment or hears people saying, how dare you double bill or you're making money off of this, no. This is what it said, and that's what it means, and it's very clear, I think, in the minutes that it's additional work, so please pass that on. The other thing is we had a major water line break last night at Birch and, what was it?
River Road.
River Road.
North River Road, yeah.
Yeah, a 6-inch water line that split about, 10 feet long? So it cracked at 10 feet long. The crew was working on that all night. They'll be doing cleanup and everything today, but that is back in service and operating. So just thought I'd let you know that part too, if you hear anything on that.
Richard, is that another aging part of our infrastructure like the one that was on Taylor and 6th? I mean, I heard that was an old water main. Is that what's...
Yeah, they're old pipes, and I mean, this one was it a cast iron?
Yeah, it looked like a cast iron pipe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they just reach an age, and this time of year, as well as when the soil moves around and stuff too, with additional moisture and cold and things, help aggravate some of those issues to it as well. So it could have been an age thing that finally just found a defect in the pipe. We're aware that it decided to split. Could have had something to do with soil movement as well, as things expand and contract with additional water or cold temperatures. But yeah, we had a crack that cracked along the pipe, split along it. So that's been repaired and taken care of. But just letting you know that, yeah.
Thank you, Richard.
Councilor Urban.
Do we monitor the temperature of the water coming out of the treatment plant, and do we see any correlation with, like, when it, or do we know how much loss is happening, or do we heat it at all, or is it just whatever the temperature coming out of the river is through the filtering process?
Yeah, we monitor the temperature because that has to do with the treatment process, how much chemical, maintain the pH, all of those things intertwine a little bit too. So we monitor it, we see what the temperature is. Generally, the temperature's in the 50s, I believe, Faye. It's
That's
usually
correct,
around 54, somewhere around there, and we do not heat it in any way. Once it's underground, most of it stays a pretty consistent temperature. Although during the summer, our water temperature will go up a little bit because we're pulling out of the river's a little warmer. The reservoirs get a little warmer. But yeah, so the temperature has to do with, how well the chlorine stays in the water to disinfect it too. And so all that plays a part, and that's why they monitor the temperature, but we don't heat it or cool it.
And we do regular weekly, what we call blow-offs. So you might see staff go out there to several key locations in the city where essentially the water doesn't get utilized. It's limited use. And so we could see the temperature go up a little bit. We could also have some issues with our chlorine not being the appropriate levels. So those blow-offs help keep our water temperature consistent, and it also helps manage the chlorine content. What we're seeing now is what's happening when from winter to summer is that and wet to dry, we have contraction and expansion from our soils. And so as those soils contract or expand over a year, multi-years worth of time, years ago, folks used to refill their ditches when they installed pipe with the existing material that was there. I'm sure they were careful, but big rocks, what we find at a break is there may be a rock that's right up against the pipe. And as the ground contracts and expands, there's a slight bit of movement. And, imagine over 50 to 75 years, you end up having a weak spot in that pipe. And that's generally most of the time what ends up happening.
And nowadays, we put finer gravel and sand in the bed of the pipe so it's resting in a better place. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So one just quick comment. Oh, I'm sorry, Richard or Faye, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more comment to the Safe Routes to Schools project. One of the challenges with this project is it's been over multi-years. And I just want to assure the council that we've had multiple public outreach meetings. We've sent multiple letters to the individuals. They were notified that, if we weren't successful in getting a grant, or if we weren't successful in getting enough money to cover the project, that there may be some sort of additional compensation needed from the property owner to assist in the project. But because the grant came in and we had such favorable bids, at this point right now, and we're getting close to seeing this project come up, we don't expect any more overages per se to the sidewalk portion of this project. We feel pretty confident that there's not going to be any additional charges to the landowners. But I just want to assure, when you have a project that goes this long, maybe folks don't understand the true process we go through, and they just take bits and pieces of information and really don't understand what's all entailed in the project. So I just wanted to add that.
So that was great timing, Faye, because that was my comment exactly, is that, oh my goodness, these folks are so lucky. When we went through that Johnson LID years ago, all of those homeowners ended up paying for all of that infrastructure, increase. Now there's, good low interest loans that go along with that, but these folks have been very, very fortunate that the city sought that grant, so I guess I'm a little bothered, that folks are kind of picking at those comments when these folks have been so fortunate. So that was my comment. Richard, did you have something else?
Yeah, and I do want to stress that the grant money goes for the sidewalks and improvements that did the Safe Routes to Schools. We're still paying out of the street fund for the major road projects that are going on there as well. I mean, all of 4th Street, Fillmore, there's some work on Grant, there's some work on tailor as well that some of that street money is being spent there. We're also taking a lot of comments right now about potholes, and we're not doing any road improvements or road work. There's a whole bunch of road work going on, and you need to go drive. It might not be in your neighborhood, but the whole city is seeing the benefits of some significant new road surfaces and road improvements in this project that are street funded projects.
Okay, anything else to come before the council this morning? If not, we're adjourned.
Mike, great job.
Oh, thank you. All right.